Campaign Diary number 19, the Gear Up Montage. The beginning of tonight's campaign installment was designed to get the player characters ready for the long road north through the wilderness towards Nirvos' lair. Now, one of the things, the party came back and had a long meeting with Faith. And honestly, I'm not usually much for characters. I like to leave their actual appearance to your imagination. But I saw this picture and it looked really how I pictured Faith, or the old and wise and world-weary elven mage. But she discussed and talked to the party when they had returned, and she laid out what she thought was her hypothesis for Nirvos' sort of strange behaviors. She said, dragons love treasure, but dragons also love minions and followers and slaves and things like that. And Nirvos doesn't really fit that. So her and Glacier, the silver dragon who was met earlier in the adventures, went and did some searching, and they found that Nirvos is an outcast from what you would think of as Red Dragon society. And what they suspect with his behaviors is that he is attempting to become one of these, a Draco Lich. Most dragons are content as they get... Dragons get stronger as they age. They are, in that way, very backwards. But there are a select few who will, for megalomaniac reasons, they start to endeavor towards becoming undead versions of themselves. And a Draco Lich is very, very dangerous, to say the least. But this is also influenced probably by the presence of the evil goddess of death, Chris, who has made her way into your realm. And as part of this discussion, the party came up with a new quest. The reality is, if Nirvos succeeds, she becomes even more powerful, therefore she needs to be stopped. So when the party hits her compound layer, anything that the party finds that might be useful in the transformation should be destroyed. Things like we brought up: potions, symbols, papers, etc., etc. That the party needs to attempt to stop this transformation, or else they'll have a larger problem on their hands. The party then had some downtime activities to prepare for the journey north. They got foodstuffs, things of that nature. Moving out onto the glacial ice, they came across and were attacked by 4 woolly mammoths. This battle was fairly simple, fairly straightforward. The party's advantage was woolly mammoths are tough. They are difficult to combat, and they do a lot of damage, but they don't do a lot of damage if you can fight them at range, and the party was managed to do so. So there were a few injuries, as I said, but it was a fairly straightforward battle. And that ended really the first day of the party's journey. And as they settled down that night, they had a late-night guest. Nirvos himself dropped by for a nightcap. And what happened? Nirvos came to taunt the party. As we said, the Red Dragons have an ego, and they love games. They love conflict. So Nirvos really came to sort of taunt the party, sort of acknowledge, I know you're coming, come on in, you'll never defeat me, things of that nature. But the situation boiled down into actual combat. The sword swinging began, things of that nature. we had about a round of combat. There was some fighting, but Nirvos transformed back into a dragon, breathed fire once, and then flew off into the middle of the night. Now, that's the events that happened. These events have given way to two pieces of advice I want to give the party moving forward. The first piece of advice is for the types of spells that are useful in fights. My party, generally speaking, has done really well with blasting spells or damage spells. I started thinking about this sorcerer spells, things like Firebolt, Ray of Frost, Shocking Grasp, Magic Missile, and most lately spells like Fireball and Lightning Bolt. But there's also Ice Storm. These all cause lots and lots of damage. Even our clerics get in on this. Their Sacred Flames, their Guiding Bolts, and their Spiritual Weapon and Spirit Guardian spells, these cause damage. These are what I believe in our campaign, I would say have been cast at least 90 to 95% of the time. The trouble is, there are other classes of spells out there that you can cast. And those are battlefield control spells. Now, we have had battlefield control spells thrown around in the past. Wall of Fire from the Battle of Acheron's Lair is a battlefield control spell. It doesn't necessarily do a lot of damage unless somebody is foolish enough to try and walk through it. But there's also, last night you cast, Sleet Storm was cast. Sleet Storm is seen as one of the best battlefield control spells there is. And famously, one of the big battlefield control spells, the good old-fashioned grease spell of the now famous euphemism that came up as well. These spells are designed to shape and control the battlefield and how the fight continues. Now, these are incredibly useful spells, but they are a different kind, and I think inexperience and lack of practice may have caused the Sleet Storm not to be as effective. First thing, when you're dealing with battlefield control spells, that most do not cause direct damage. Sleet Storm does not. Grease does not. It becomes really, really hard to walk. It slows down enemies, things of that nature. The second thing that they are different is they do require party combat strategy. What this means is if you control the battlefield with some kind of effect, you need the whole party really to be on the same page. I'll give you an example from previous adventures. When you fought at the Battle of Larswood, when the Orc army marched to try to take and destroy that village, you could have dropped a Sleet Storm on the lead elements of that army at some point and slowed their progress down. But for that to work, you would have needed your party to be outfitted with ranged weapons to shoot over the ice, through the fog, and things like that your opponents would not have been able to manage. So battlefield control requires the party to be all on the same page. Third, and I think this is most important, battlefield control spells require the right spell for the right target. For instance, Sleet Storm is an excellent spell if you are fighting an all ground-based attack. If you're fighting, again, that Orc army example. Fighting a dragon who can take off and fly did have an effect. You got him prone. The bad news was that he was able to pick himself right up and fly off. There are a host of battlefield control spells out there. And something the party and the casters should be thinking about is, what spells are the best way for me to control the battlefield along with my party to improve and increase our chances of victory? The second and last thing I want to talk about was I was caught a little unprepared. When I planned the conversation with Nirvos as a social encounter, some taunting, back and forth, etc. I didn't expect it to turn into a combat counter. And because I didn't expect it to be a combat counter, I didn't have Nirvos statted it out. I didn't have exactly what his hit points are, armor class, effects, etc. Because this was the first time that you met Nirvos where there was no restraints involved. You met him in a tavern. There was plenty of back and forth with extended telepathy, and when he showed up at the end of Acheronus, he protected himself with a sphere of invulnerability that sealed you off between him. And this is a Dungeon Master error. And I think some of his abilities, stats, damage, things of that nature were a little bit confused when we played it out because I didn't have it all written down and said, here it is the way I see it. But I've mentioned it, and I think I've been consistent on a conceptual basis. Nirvos is more powerful than a typical adult red dragon, but he is not as powerful as an ancient red dragon. So I have to figure out where he is in that balance between those two. Now, what does this mean for my players? Before next session, he will be statted out. He will have his statistics, his armor class, his breath weapons, his special abilities, all written down in the pursuit of consistency and fairness in the future. So with this in mind, the next time you encounter Nirvos, there may be slight changes to him. For instance, he may have a slightly different armor class. This is a good example. An ancient red dragon has a 23 armor class, whereas an adult red dragon's got a 19. Nirvos will probably be somewhere between those two. Their breath weapons can also change. So his breath weapon, I will warn you, is still really, really bad news, but there may be different damage associated with it the next time you encounter Nirvos. When our adventure continues, the party crossed 5 of the 100 leagues to Nirvos' lair, so you have made progress. And our journey north across the frozen wastes towards that ring of fire that Nirvos calls his lair will continue.